This is my presentation on the causes of the American Civil War. Here we have the original 13 colonies. The colonies in pink are the northern colonies. The colonies in the yellow are the middle colonies, and the colonies in the orange are the southern colonies. Before the Revolutionary War, the North had a small slave population, helping around with tasks such as cutting down lumber, hunting for furs, or loading ships. The middle colonies had a larger population of slaves, and they were doing task labor. The owners of the enslaved one would give them a task or a list of tasks to do in a day, and once the tasks for that day are done, the rest of the day was theirs. They could have jobs to earn money and maybe purchase their freedom, or they could have their own gardens, whatever their owner allowed. The South, although, had gang labor. This was the worst type of slavery, where the owner hired drivers that would work the slaves, and it would control where they were picking, and they worked from the time the driver said to start till the time the driver said to stop. Could be all night, could be all morning, and then all night. It was up to them. After the Revolutionary War, the North lost its economic purpose for slavery, so they slowly started to end slavery in the states. The middle became either slave or free states, depending on how far north they were or how far south they were. It kind of depended. Where the South, slavery just got bigger, and they doubled down on it. So the first act to try to limit slavery was the Missouri Compromise. No state above the southern border of Missouri would be a slave state other than Missouri. This failed to solve the problem long term because the majority of the land that they were talking about would have been freed states. And these Southerners, the Southern slave owners, really didn't like this. Then you had the Compromise of 1850. This allowed California to enter as a free state. And it enacted the Fugitive Slave Act. Any runaway slaves would be returned to their slave owners, no matter where they were caught. And it could be in a free state that they were caught in, and they would still be returned. This also ended the slave trade in the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. Then you had the Kansas-Nebraska Act. This completely ignored the Missouri Compromise, and it left it up to the states whether they were going to be freed or slaves. And this caused a lot of fighting between the people in each state, and there was a lot of death caused because of it. Here you have the maps. Here's the line of the Missouri Compromise. Above this line, there were no slave states. Here you have the Compromise of 1850, which really didn't talk about what states should be or should not be freed or slaved. It only enacted California being a freed state. And then you have the Kansas-Nebraska Act that completely ignored the Missouri Compromise. So the economics of the North, they were all about turning raw goods into manufactured goods. That's what they built the factories, they built what was needed to turn raw goods into manufactured goods and produce things. They relied heavily on railroads, steamboats, and canals to transport their manufactured goods all around the country, mostly to the west. And you have the Southern economic slaves. It was just slaves. I mean, the Southern economic system was just owning slaves, owning land and owning labor. The more land you had and the more laborers you had to work that land, the richer you were. You were producing cash crops like cotton, tobacco, rice. You're producing the raw goods that the North needed. The social life in the North, families worked outside of the home. They worked in factories, and that was pretty much it. Both men and women worked in the North. They weren't treated equally, but they worked. In the South, families worked on small farms, and the majority of them did not own slaves. It was only the elites that owned slaves. And it was the ones that owned mostly the elites owned slaves. A few did own slaves, but the majority of them did not. The political views in the North, you had the Republicans. They wanted to limit the spread of slavery in the West. They were not about abolishing the slave system. It wasn't about going into the South and ending it. It was just not allowing it to travel west. The Democrats, they were split. In the South, under John C. Bridge Creek, they wanted to expand slavery. They wanted to guarantee that Western states would be slave states. Where in the North, under Stephen Douglas, they wanted to leave it up to the states. They wanted to allow the states to make the decision. They were split, and that's what allowed Abraham Lincoln to become president. The nation as a whole was just fundamentally different. They were almost two different countries under one nation. The only similarity was they both benefited from the work of enslaved people. The North just didn't want to admit it. The manufacturing people relied on the raw goods that the South produced, and the South produced these goods with slavery. The North just didn't see it that way. They saw that because they were free states, they did not rely on slavery. It wasn't the case. And it was these differences that resulted in the Civil War. 1861, the Southern states sent Abraham Lincoln, after he became president, the Ordinance of Secession, leaving the Union. Here's Georgia's Ordinance of Secession, and that's what caused the Civil War, the fundamental differences in the nation. Thank you for watching my presentation. Have a good one.